Thank you, Mr President. In the Honourable Mr No's contribution, he highlighted the functions of the Aboriginal Lands Parliamentary Standing Committee. I wish to highlight these functions again today. They included the reviewing of the operation of 3 acts of this Parliament: the Aboriginal Lands Trust Act 2013, the Maralinga Jaracha Land Rights Act 1984 and the APY Lands Act 1981. The committee was able to inquire into matters affecting the interests of traditional owners of the lands, to look into the manner in which the lands were being managed, used and controlled, and to inquire into the matters concerning the welfare of Aboriginal people. The committee has traditionally visited many Aboriginal lands and communities. It has also held strong relationships with Aboriginal landholding statutory authorities. Speaking with representatives from those communities and statutory authorities allowed the committee to be updated on current issues. Mr President, my membership on this committee was regretfully only brief. I was appointed to this committee upon the retirement of the Honourable Stephen Wade only earlier this year, and note that this committee has since been wound up. In my very limited time on this committee, it provided me the opportunity to hear firsthand from Indigenous groups and to learn from their submissions on the inquiry into Aboriginal heritage. It was a committee that I looked forward to joining for the opportunity to engage directly with Indigenous communities. This committee was an important conduit between Indigenous communities and members of this Parliament. When this Parliament passed the First Nations Voice Act 2023, it included in it, amongst other things, the function to repeal the Aboriginal Lands Parliamentary Standing Committee Act 2003. My opposition to this legislation and my position on the upcoming Federal Voice to Parliament referendum is well known. A Voice to Parliament seeks to create an unfortunate divide in our nation based on race. An important pillar of our democracy is that we are all equal. One person, one vote. The establishment of a Voice to Parliament undermines the very premise of equal representation, giving greater weight to the voice of one group over another, and to create barriers to representation based on race. Instead of being one Australia, instead of being equal, we will become divided with separate voices, separate powers, separate votes, determined by race. It perplexes me, Mr President, that this government would wind up such a body that would increase the ability for members of this Parliament to be able to engage with grassroots Indigenous communities and to engage in matters of significance to Aboriginal people. Mr Acting President, when the Malinowskis Labor government rushed the First Nations Voice Bill through the Parliament, the Minister for Aboriginal Affairs said, "We are poised to lead the nation again, and make no mistake, the nation will be watching very closely ahead of the referendum to be held later this year." Well, Mr Acting President, the nation has watched as the Labor government ran through this legislation, including an unprecedented Sunday sitting of the Parliament. The nation has watched as the Labor government arrogantly decided to not wait for the outcome of the federal referendum before creating a state-based voice to hear what South Australians really wanted. The nation has watched as the Labor government has repealed legislation which provided for a parliamentary committee to engage with Indigenous communities. The nation has watched as the Labor government has postponed the elections that were meant to happen only a matter of weeks from now, leaving our Parliament without a dedicated committee, without a voice, for a significant period. Mr President, one must wonder why the Aboriginal Lands Committee has been repealed in circumstances where it seems somewhat counterproductive to champion for the betterment of Indigenous communities and increase engagement, yet see it appropriate to remove another channel for parliamentary engagement. It is disappointing and seems a missed opportunity for further community engagement. We all know that committees can do incredibly important work, but this government has made a conscious decision to repeal the Aboriginal Lands Standing Committee. The Voice is expected to be able to pick up the ground that this committee would otherwise cover, yet the Voice is not equipped as a parliamentary committee. One wonders why the government didn't try and work with the existing infrastructure to enhance the capacity for these issues to be investigated within this committee, drawing upon the resources of committee processes. The Parliament will now be left without the ability to reflect upon the work of the Aboriginal Land Standing Committee, any submissions and evidence that it otherwise would have received into the future. It is counterproductive to postpone the state voice elections and leave this Parliament with no committee. A committee that enabled grassroots community members to engage with members of Parliament. Instead of having a committee where we can hear the voices of many, we will now have a body that purports to speak on behalf of all Aboriginal people, but we will only hear the voices of the few.
Thank you.